Okay, so yeah, does anyone have any questions that they would like to start with? I did get a couple of emails like this morning and last night. So I want to, I'll address those questions as well. But yeah, Naomi, I see that your hand is up. So if you wanna start, go right
Yes,
ahead.
I'd love to. In fact, I keep meaning to. Yep.
Can you
Hello.
just hang on a sec? My audio isn't working here. Just a second. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, that's better. Thank you.
Okay. So I've made a glaze, and let's see. I initially tried a glaze that had nickel and cobalt oxide, which gave me this beautiful color on red clay. Actually, it was on the Plainsman, I guess it was a 390, I think. Anyhow, red clay, beautiful. Here is the color. Hold on, sorry. Got to figure this out here. Anyhow, this lovely, lovely blue on the red clay.
Yeah.
And it it looks a little like a, it kind of has like a little bit of a floating blue effect. What I was trying to do, well, I went from making 100-gram batch to another 100-gram batch with cobalt carbonate. And so I made the adjustment for the cobalt carbonate, which I believe is like 1.5 cobalt carbonate for the 1 cobalt oxide. And I tested that and it was good. And then I made a big batch and it was not at all the same. And it ended up turning out like, let's see, here we go. Here you can, sorry, I will move, I'm going to turn the screen so then I can do it. Here we go. Okay, so in the light, sorry, can you see this here?
Yeah.
And so what it ended up doing was, as you can see along edges, because I had done it in a bowl as well. So here, as well as let's say on the lip of a cup. And again, this here I'm showing you right now is on white clay.
Yes.
And I did do it on red clay as well. Unfortunately, I don't think I have the specimen with me at the moment. But it ended up doing something really, really different.
Okay.
And so I had done adjustments in terms of the glaze viscosity. Oh, here's another lovely sample. That was just, oh, beautiful. And so I had done adjustments in the glaze viscosity. Then it was really like very, it's using Epsom salt. It was sort of hard to tell, I gotta say, but I ended up getting it to about, I think it was like 1.47 when I had done actually the last one that I showed you with the whitish lip. Yeah. What's happening though is it's starting to like melt off the rim.
Right.
So I'm not sure where to go. I ended up taking all the water, extra water out of it. And then I basically readjusted it and I have yet to fire it. But I'm just like, I'm very nervous about this batch of 6 kilos of glaze.
Yeah. So do you, it was hard for me to tell, like, is there a big difference in between the two colors? Like,
yes. Okay. So here, and I wish, you know, I forgot, I don't go to my studio often and I ended up forgetting a bunch of things. Okay. So this on the red clay, it again, how can I show you? Okay, here. Okay. So it sort of goes like kind of floating bluish. It's got a lovely little brown in there as well. You see?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And again, I will just,
So that's
on the red clay, okay?
And that's the version that you like, right?
That's the version that I like.
Okay.
And then I will show you the other test. Here. Okay. Okay. This is where, sorry. Here. Here. Okay. Here it is. All right. On the red clay. It's like almost like a black. I wish you can't get a good idea of it in here. Darn. Hold on. Let me see here. It turned out really, really dark. Lovely, but like super dark. Not what I expected at all.
Right.
Here's another. Here's another. Can you see that here against a white background? There.
Yeah.
So very strange.
So the one that you like is it's like a dark blue, but it's not quite as dark. Like
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a couple things. So first there's the switch between the cobalt oxide and the cobalt carbonate.
Right.
So I'm wondering if that could have something to do with the results. And then there's also the 100-gram batch, which it's quite, I mean, it's quite common for, what was the percentage of cobalt in those glazes? So like of the cobalt
oxide, the initial was 1.
Okay, 1%. Yeah.
And in the, and again, in the redone one, it was 1.5 cobalt carbonate, because that's the
conversion.
Yeah, that's the conversion. Like I read lots and lots of information, and I think in terms of like the molecules, etc. Anyhow, so I'm not sure where to go from here to make the color work out, and B, I guess I'm not sure. Like when it went on, it actually took very long to dry, which was quite, unnerving. And it just, like, it seemed really thick, but, and it took, forever to dry. And so I did add more Epsom to it to get it to be a little, I guess, more viscous, but less. So I had taken out water and then added some more Epsom salts, but I don't know where to go from here.
Okay. Did you do a sample of the first test on a lighter clay body at all, or just the dark?
Let me see. Did I test that one on a lighter clay body?
And the other question I have.
Oh yeah, hold on. Did I? Hold on. Going through all my tests. Oh yes, I did. And get this, also beautiful here. Oh no, that's not right. Sorry. I had moved to red clay, which was like a big commitment, right?
Yes.
Cleaning wise and contamination and everything. Oh, no, I didn't. I guess I didn't.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of see like the transparency and like with the white showing through.
Look at the inside of this in the red. Like this was just like I was singing with joy.
Yeah.
That color.
So did you measure the specific gravity of your 100-gram test batch?
I did, and the initial specific gravity, I believe, was, I think it was around 1.5.
Okay. And then this one was a little bit less. Your larger batch was a little bit less. You said it was around 1.47 or?
Yeah, exactly. I ended up getting it to 1.4. No, actually, it was even, That's right. So it was at one point, the big batch was at 1.6, and then I was like, okay, dial it back there. And so that's when I ended up finally removing some water and then adding some Epsom. Does that make sense? So I have a whole bunch of water now, like at the top of the glaze. I haven't mixed it in a little while.
Okay. So you flocculated the big batch with Epsom salts, but you didn't flocculate the smaller batch?
I think I did. Like just a little bit. I would have for sure, because it's like it's pretty common for me to do it. Like I've been using Epsom salts for a while, but not super scientifically. It's just, I've been more, trained at school and everything. You just sort of do it to the eye and like your finger, right? That's the way I was trained.
Yes,
so
for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have the recipe?
Yeah. So it's the blueberry. It's like the Studio Managers. It's on Glazy.
Is it?
So,
okay.
Yeah. Here it is. Can I take a picture of it? Sorry. Do you want me to?
So there's black nickel and cobalt.
Hold on. Let's see. Can I? No, I can't send it to you, eh? Sorry, I'm moving.
Yeah.
Yes, I can share content. Here. Done.
Okay, yes. I see that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there's 4% rutile. Oh, I see.
No. It's the one on the bottom.
The one on the bottom.
But I made that's the original recipe. Sorry, it's the one that's readable right now. So I did do the cobalt oxide. I did not use. I used the cobalt carbonate 1.5. It's in another book.
Okay. And then
my other one's like not readable for you, so
that's okay. And you use black nickel oxide and
cobalt carbonate.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my guess, okay, a couple things. So my guess on the color is that possibly like in the 100-gram batch, maybe you had a little bit less than 1%. So maybe, what size batch is your large batch?
Okay, so that one was supposed to be, really, I do things well. This is the caveat, but I ended up initially, I ended up miscalculating the cobalt carbonate. So I put too much in, so I had to readjust my whole recipe. So it was supposed to be 5 kilos, but then I ended up having to do it to 6, 666, the sign of the devil. I ended up having to readjust it to 6.6 kilos.
Okay.
Yeah. So but 100%, like my notations were good. Like I'm positive about that. I was very meticulous about that. I just ended up I put 100 of cobalt carbonate in initially. That was just, I screwed up that math, but every other math was fine.
Okay. I see.
Mm-hmm. Right, so I had to make an allowance for that.
So you put in 100 grams, in 5,000 grams, you put in 100 grams of cobalt carbonate, which would have been 2%.
Too much. Yeah, exactly.
Instead of
so
1.
Then I ended up having to put everything else, jack everything else up. So there were a bunch of rewritings of the recipe.
Yeah. And then, so this is the recipe here that you followed, except for the additions, you added what's on the bottom. So you use this recipe that's on the top here.
Without the rutile and the black nickel, okay?
Yeah. Okay.
So the pussy willow is the base, and then I added 2% black nickel, and again I ended up doing 1.5 cobalt carbonate and 2% bentonite. And there's red art in the recipe, initial recipe, but there's options to just sub OM4. So I doubled the OM4, no red art.
And you did that in both your test and your large batch?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, I'm going to stop, or can you go back to, okay, I'm just going to stop your screen share.
Hi.
Yeah,
okay, good.
so we can
Sorry, I
chat.
didn't know how to do that.
Yeah, that's totally okay.
Okay.
Okay, so I believe that the large batch probably has too much cobalt in it because it's that black. Because if you keep adding cobalt, it goes from blue to like dark blue and into black.
Okay.
So what I would suggest is maybe you could take half of your bucket. So mix your bucket really, really well so that it's homogenized. Split it into two. And then you should know, or you could split it into however many you want. Like you could, so you have a smaller batch that you can kind of work with.
Yes.
So, and then maybe double your recipe and leave out the cobalt, because then that would cut it in half.
Right. Okay.
And then
I see.
and do that test, and and then you would kind of see like because if that's closer to what you're going for, then you would know that it's just a matter of too much cobalt, and it could be either that you didn't put enough cobalt in the very small 100-gram batch, like, so it's really easy for 100-gram batch, especially for the colorants, to be kind of off. And with cobalt being so powerful, like,
and cobalt oxide too in the initial batch too.
Yeah, so even if it's like 0.8 instead of 1%, that could make a big difference.
Right. Okay. And
then the other thing you mentioned was that it was taking a long time to dry. And so I just wanted to talk about that for a second. So generally when you flocculate a glaze, did you flocculate it because it was really thin and you felt like you wanted it to thicken up? Because that's what flocculation does.
Yeah, so it was too thin. And like, again, I've from like I work a lot with mostly transparent glazes, so like I use a lot of underglazes often, but I flocculated it because it's just kind of what I do. Like, I know how it affects the drying as well, but I flocculated it, and then it didn't seem to work. So I flocculated it too much, or, which is, I guess, possible, because I think you saw at some point actually that I made my special batch of Epsom that had crystallized. Remember that?
Right. Yeah.
Anyhow, so I guess it is possible that I did that. But I mean, from the rules that I know, again, like, I'm going by a certain amount of instinct as well, often when I'm making my choices. So it's a little hard to rein me in, and maybe that's why I'm all puzzled right now too. But perhaps I had added too much Epsom, but it definitely, it took way too long to dry. And usually I don't have to, if I dip something, I hold it up for 30 seconds and it's good to go, right? And put down. This was very saturated. So it sounds like it maybe has too much Epsom salts, because flocculating will make the glaze take longer to dry. Because what happens when you flocculate, it's like all the particles stick together, and then they also hang on to the water, so that when you dip your bisque into the glaze, a flocculated glaze doesn't release the water into the bisque as
as easily. And so often when you have a glaze that dries too fast, where it like the bisque sucks the water up as soon as you pull it out, and then you get like drips on the side, that usually means that the glaze could use some flocculating because it's drying so fast. And so flocculating will help the glaze not take as long to dry. So like if you're painting, if you're brushing your glazes, and the glaze dries as soon as you hit your brush to the bisque, then often flocculating will help for it to stay wet a little bit longer. So, so that's one little kind of flag that I was thinking, if you end up taking this glaze, dividing it into however many, and then doubling the recipe so that you can cut the cobalt in half, I would not add any Epsom salts to that, and just do a dip before you adjust anything, and maybe before you even add any water to this new batch, because you'll be adding dry materials. Maybe before you add any water, just do a dip and then start bringing the specific gravity down, because there's thickness of the glaze, which can, if it's a transparent glaze, like if you can kind of see through it, which this glaze looks slightly transparent because you can see the clay body kind of poking through there. And so if the glaze is thicker, that's also going to affect the color. And on a dark clay body, it will make it look much more black. And on your lighter, your lighter clay body, you could kind of see those light edges poking through. So I would just be curious to see, like, with a little bit less water, and then kind of as you increase the water, see a test as you increase the water, and without adding any more flocculant, and then with less cobalt. Those are all the things that I would try.
I just wanted to throw one more thing into this equation. Which is, I did end up doing at one point an extra dip. And it's interesting because it ended up, again, I want you to be able to see it properly.
Yeah.
Okay. And so it ended up like going quite a bit darker, even tealy, but the lip didn't take it, right? So the lip always, it was running off of, or melting down off of. But yes, you're right.
Yeah.
That could have to do very much with, here's another one. So that could absolutely have to do with the
application
thickness.
And then were these all fired in the same kiln as well? That's another question. Okay.
All the same kiln, all the same program. It's just like, it's the medium fire program, cone 6 with like actually we do cone 5 with a 20-minute or 15-minute hold. That's our standard for our kiln. So that would be consistent. Yeah, because the other thing is, like with glazes with rutile in them, the cooling cycle really matters. So if it was going from this kiln to that kiln, that could totally change the appearance of the glaze after. Yeah, but that's not a rutile, right? There's no rutile in that one.
Oh, right. Yeah.
There's no rutile in that.
Okay,
It's nickel and cobalt. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But I mean, it does look, it kind of looks like it has rutile, doesn't it? Because of it has that like floating blue quality to it. That's really lovely, So, I mean, I think maybe that's the nickel though that does that as well. If I understand correctly. Anyhow.
Yeah. I'm not sure. Could very well be. I don't know that about nickel, but I haven't worked with a lot of nickel, so I see. Did anyone have anything they wanted to say about this, or like any? I saw Rebecca has her hand up, and Kirti has his hand up as well. So you're welcome to jump in or chime in, or if anyone has any ideas, there's some commenting going on in the chat, so you might want to
Oh.
have a look
How come I can't
at
see?
that.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. I'm just reading that. Oh.
And so that recipe, like on Glazy, would it be called Pussy Willow then?
Yeah, it's like the studio manager's Pussy Willow, I think.
Okay. Can you talk? Sorry, I'm just reading the chat here.
Yes. Me too.
Ginny says it looks that the glaze on the small test tile was much thinner than on the little cup that you like. Differences in thickness. Okay, yeah, definitely differences in thickness. Can you tell a bit about the cooling cycle with nickel, with Rutile? Okay, Rutile. So Rutile is made of titanium. It's about 90% titanium and 10% iron. So glazes that contain rutile or titanium dioxide, they crystallize during the cooling cycle. So you can get matte glazes that are based on the fact that they have titanium in them. And the cooling cycle, the length of the cooling cycle determines how much crystallization happens. So there are matte glazes that will be matte no matter the cooling cycle. So they're just formulated so that they're going to be matte whether it cools fast or slow. But glazes that have titanium in them, if they cool really fast, they can turn out glossy, but then if you lengthen the cooling cycle, then those crystals start to form, and then the longer the cooling cycle is, the more crystals form, and then that turns your glaze matte. Sometimes it doesn't go matte, but you get like more variation and depth in the glaze. And so if you have two different kilns and you're firing glazes with titanium in them, often different kilns have different natural cooling cycles. So I'm not talking about programming a cooling cycle. I'm just talking about the natural time that it takes your kiln to get from the top temperature to room temperature where you're going to unload it. And so if the natural cooling cycle increases, that can increase the amount of crystallization that happens in your glaze. And so that can often really change the appearance of your glaze. So I have this glaze with chrome and titanium, and it makes this bright green glass. And it also makes these pink flecks. And so in my kiln at home, I have this little scut kiln that cools really fast in about 10 hours. It goes from cone 6 to cold, basically. And so when I fire this glaze in that kiln, my pots come out this bright, glossy green color. And then they have like it, where it breaks on the edges, it has like these pink crystals, and like also where it pools in the bottom, you'll get like a pink ring in the bottom. But then when I fire this exact same glaze in these big cone art kilns where I work, the cone art kilns have much thicker bricks than the scut kilns. And plus a larger kiln just is gonna take more time to, I'm just gonna mute. Sorry, I was just getting some background noise. The larger kilns just naturally take longer to cool. So these cone art kilns take over 24 hours to go from cone 6 to cold. And so when this same glaze comes out of the cone art kilns, it's completely matte and pink. There's no green at all. Like you might get like a little flash of green here and there where it's thicker, but it had so much time for these titanium crystals to grow, and the crystals are a different color than the glass that they're growing in. So it completely changes the appearance of the glaze. And so this was like kind of my eye-opening experience with titanium, because the cooling cycle makes a big difference. So often I get questions where you know, people are firing these glazes in different kilns, like they have their home kilns and then they work at a community studio, and then they're confused by the results. And so that can often be the case. Or some people have a small test kiln and then a large kiln for firing their body of work. And so then they do a bunch of tests in their small kiln, and then they make a big batch and then apply it to their body of work and fire those in the big kiln, and then their results can be quite dramatically different. So that's the thing about rutile and the cooling cycle. So, yeah, I saw, Rebecca, your hand has been up for a while. Did you have something that you wanted to say? If not, I can just lower your hand. Okay, no problem. And then if anyone does have something, Cindy, I see your hand is up. Did you want to?
Well, I was just trying to learn from Naomi's experience. And one of the things I was thinking is so when I'm trying a new glaze, if I do a 200-gram batch as my test batch, I was thinking 200 grams would be a better spot. But would it be a good idea to then do a 500-gram batch before I did anything bigger? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I often, when I'm just testing a new recipe that I'm not sure about, that I'm not sure if I want to use, I'm just experimenting, I will do a 200-gram batch. So that's the smallest that I'll usually make, and that's just because I don't have a scale that's accurate to like 0.1 grams. Like I have a triple balance scale, and so those you can measure 1/10 of a gram. But just to be safe, I like to do 200 grams because it's just easier to get those colorants accurate. But when I definitely will make a 500-gram batch of anything that I want to pursue further, because 500 grams or even 1,000 grams, because I want to make sure that it matches the teeny tiny test batch, because it's so common for this to happen, where you make, and you, it's not to say that you were sloppy with your measurements or anything. It's just like the equipment that we're using, we rely on it to be as accurate as possible. And so sometimes with these really powerful ingredients like cobalt, and chrome is another one where like even 0.1% can make a big difference. Then the larger the batch you make, the easier it is to be really accurate with those colorant percentages. So yeah, to answer your question.
Well, I feel like there are so many variables with a glaze. I mean, I just think the more I can do to try to isolate those variables, the better off I'll be.
For sure, yeah. And like with the smaller the batch, it's easier, you know, if you have a 500-gram batch and then this happens where you're like, oh, I think maybe I added too much colorant, it's easy to just make another 500 grams to cut that colorant in half, and then you still only have like 1,000 grams, and it's not like these big buckets. But it's okay, Naomi. Like,
good.
I've been there for sure. Like, I have these huge buckets of glaze that I've ruined and tried to fix, and then I just have to say goodbye. And sometimes I am able to fix them. And if you can get it, you know, as long as you measure, you mix it really well, and then measure the volume, and then you can repeat that. You know, if you take a quarter of your glaze and you get it working, then make sure you have every little step that you did written down, so you can repeat that with the rest of the buckets.
I think the problem was also, I find with a smaller batch, I can't get enough of a surface to see like really what I wanted to try was dipping like I would on a mug, right? So I really wanted to see a larger area because that's really what, right? You have a teeny piece, it's one, you know, a tile, it's one thing, a teeny cup, it's another thing, but seeing it on a bigger surface, and application problems happen when you have such a teeny batch. And then that's where I can't control variables either, because I'm doing all these strange dippy thingies that I don't ever do, right? So it was sort of like trying to balance that. I was like, oh, I'm just gonna go for it. But yeah, clearly I learned my lesson there, and I will do the adjustments that you suggested. Thank you very much, by the way.
You're welcome.
Like, I feel like, oh yeah, you just opened a door in my brain, so that's good.
Perfect. Yeah, and having those little bowls, like those are really good for testing because you want to start with test tiles, but then you also want to have some pots. So like I throw on the hump and I'll just take like 3,000 grams of clay and just make like a whole bunch of little testing pots. So then I graduate. So I'll graduate from a small test size to a large bucket, but I also graduate like from a small test tile to a test pot to a larger pot, and then you kind of there's things to learn along the way.
Yes. Yeah. And I was trying, I think I just really tried to skip like it's just a question of studio space and all that. So it's just like, you know, I'm like all these boxes of tests and more tests. It's just like, whoa, what do I do with them? You know?
Totally.
So anyhow, yeah, exactly.
I hear you.
Give them away to people. They love them.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I see Kirti, you have your hand up. Did you have something that you wanted to say?
So I send you one email. Have you read it?
Was it today?
No, today, before 1 week.
Oh, okay.
About the viscosity measurement and density measurement and something to start for this this type of artist. It is a very small test to maintain the quality.
Yep.
I have sent you one email. I cannot explain very much now, but for the measurement of density is much important, and also the viscosity flow. We poured cup of flow to maintain the quality of glaze.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. Definitely. Are you?
So you ask everybody, you inform everybody how to measure the viscosity and density.
The viscosity and density. Yeah, the density being the specific gravity of the glaze. Yeah. Yes. That is something that I tell people often is how to measure the specific gravity.
And make a record of the every glazes, every batches. So every time they will get the perfect result.
Right. Yes, I see what you're saying. Yeah, so Kirti is just recommending that you measure the specific gravity and then that you write that down so that every time you glaze, you have consistency from batch to batch, right? Of your water content and then of your viscosity as well.
Yeah, viscosity means the flow time. How much flow of glaze, a 100 ml glaze is 30 seconds or 40 seconds. So can know about this flocculant, how much add to flocculant. If the viscosity can measure the flow time, so we can decide the flocculant agent to add.
Right.
Enough. Yeah.
Yeah, so there are tools that you can get, like a Ford cup or a Zahn cup, and it's a little cup with a hole in the bottom. So you scoop your glaze out, and then you measure the number of seconds it takes for the cup to drain.
Right.
And that's how you measure the viscosity. So if your glaze has high viscosity, it'll take longer to drain than a glaze with low viscosity. And so this is a tool that you can use to measure the number of seconds so you can get really specific with your viscosity measurements.
Right.
And then yes. Is that a Ford cup, Naomi?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so
yes.
There we go.
Yes.
Yeah, and so then if your viscosity is too low, then you can flocculate your glaze to increase the viscosity.
And also the measurement of the density.
Yeah, the measurement of the density. And so the density is measured, you take a volume of glaze and you weigh it in grams.
Right.
And then you divide the grams by the milliliters.
And make a record of the every glaze every time.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. And then every glaze, you have your measurements, your density measurement, your viscosity. I don't use a viscosity cup like this. I use visually. I watch the glaze move in the bucket. So I haven't got into this level of precision with my viscosity measurements yet.
You can make your own viscosity cup in your studio.
Yeah, all you need is a cup with a hole in the bottom, and as long as you're always using the same cup, then
you have to decide your flow time.
Yep. Yep, exactly.
And also the fineness of the glaze to get the perfect quality.
Yes. Yeah.
Residue on the 300 mass is every time nearest as your standards.
Right. Yeah, and that's the best way to get consistency with your results. Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So
very good.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I see Andrea has her hand raised. Oh, and then Chris, I see you as well. Your hand is, oh yeah, and I got your email. So I'll start with Andrea. Did you want to get on video? Or maybe you raised your hand by accident, but I don't see you on the video. So Andrea, I'll come back to you. And then Chris, did you want to ask your questions?
Yes, I did. Okay. So at the moment I'm using a cone art kiln, 7 cubic, and I'm going to be buying a scut, I believe, when I get my new studio up and running.
Yeah.
And I was just really confused about when I was reading how you put it together. The scut talks about needing to have holes in the bottom, which I sort of understand because it seems like the venting system comes from underneath instead of the side. The thing about the holes on the top, I don't know why, it just freaked me out. And then and then it suggests that you fire with all of the peepholes closed. So in my logic, when I'm not terribly logic a lot of the time, I'm thinking that can you just leave the peephole open, which I usually do, and not have to sort of drill holes in the lid, which I don't know why, it just makes me really nervous.
Yeah, so the holes in the lid are because if you're drawing air out of the kiln, then you need a place for air to enter the kiln. And so it's quite common when you have a venting system that you have, so if your vent is on the bottom, then you need your air holes on the top for the circulation. So the vent is pulling air from the bottom and it's pulling air through the top. And then down out the bottom, so the air goes through the whole kiln and then out the bottom. And
it wouldn't do the same with the peephole then?
I
can see how it would be different. Yeah,
I guess it wouldn't be, the circulation maybe wouldn't be as even with it just opening a peephole. Yeah, but I can see like it's a bit nerve-wracking to be drilling holes in your kiln with this brand new kiln. Yeah, but that is quite common. So if you do have the venting system in the bottom, then I would follow the instructions and drill those holes in the top. Yeah. Oh, Lindsay says her scut came with the holes already drilled, so that could be
the bottom and the top.
Possibly, yes. She says yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So that could be.
That would make me feel better. Thank you.
Yeah, if it just came like that and you didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
Understood, for sure.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Did you have 2 questions?
I did. I had. I'm wanting to make big planters, and I haven't done much research. I just thought I'd ask the question if anyone else has, in terms of the kind of clay that you need to deal with the freeze-thaw cycle, and whether it's just about literally experimenting. But if anyone has any experience of that, I would love to pick their brains.
Yeah, does anyone have experience with making planters? There was a conversation in my Facebook group recently about this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so understanding glazes with Sue. I don't have experience, but I know people were saying that they have to be vitrified because if they absorb water and then the water freezes, then that'll crack the pots. But I didn't really get too deep into that conversation. So,
Okay.
but that could be something that you could look at. And then if anyone in here has any advice or has experience with that, then please feel free to jump on in.
We're fine. Oh, that's right.
Oh, somebody's got their sound on.
Well, I'll check it out on your Facebook and I'll just do a little bit more research. But
okay.
Okay.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, Andrea, I don't know. I see your hand is still up, but I see Kevin has a question. There's a discussion about what to do with glaze that you want to dispose of. So that is a good question. I generally will dry my glaze out. So any glaze that I'm done with, I will dry out. There is a really good YouTube video of an NCECA talk with William Carty and from Alfred. He's from Alfred University, and he does this. The talk is about mason stains, but he also talks about the toxicity of all the colorants and disposing of them. And he talks about how they at Alfred University has a ceramics engineering department as well as a ceramic art department. So this university has a lot of ceramics going on. So they produce a lot of glaze, and I would imagine they have to dispose of a lot of glaze. And so this NCECA talk was about like the toxicity and what you can dispose of safely. And so, yeah, please share the link. Yeah, let me just see if I can talk and search for it at the same time. So he talks about how they, at Alfred, they have these traps. So they have the sinks where they rinse everything, and then they trap all the clay and the glaze materials with like a, I forget what it's called, but and what they did was they took the sludge from the trap and they sent it off and had it tested for toxic. And so what I would rather he explain to you what they found, but basically like the percentages of colorants that we use, like chrome, for example, is one that he mentions. He found that there wasn't enough, they didn't find enough toxic materials for it to have to go to like a hazardous waste department. So they can either dump it into the main, whatever the main disposal system, or it has to go into like a toxic hazardous waste disposal system. And so he found that there wasn't enough like regulated hazardous materials in their glaze sludge at Alfred University for it to have to go into the hazardous waste department. But just give me a second, because I'm just gonna search for the video on YouTube and see if I can find it to share with you. So it's on the NCECA YouTube channel, and it is, let's see, William Carty, or it could be Bill Carty. Okay. This could be it.
Okay, so.
Durable glazes, glaze safety. Sorry, just give me a second here. I think this is it.
It's actually really complicated.
Okay. Let me share this link with you. Even if this isn't the one, this will be a good one because they're all pretty good. So, okay, so in the chat, I just shared a link to this. It's called, the name of the talk is Glaze Safety / Durable Glazes. And so he talks about disposing of glaze materials, and I could not do it any justice trying to kind of recap what he said off the top of my head. But when I watched this video, it was really eye-opening for me. And usually when things are eye-opening for me, it's because they are less dangerous than I had originally thought. So that's just something to think about. I believe that there's a lot of, like, reasonably so, there's a lot of fear with safety in ceramics. And when we don't understand our materials and how they behave, then we just don't know what to do with them. And so when we have places like Alfred that it's like, this is what they do, you know, and ceramics engineering, like, this is the purpose of ceramics engineering, is to figure out how ceramics works. And then they also have, like, you know, scanning electron microscopes and other equipment that they can use to test things like this. And so I just found that I was like, oh, well, that's good to know, because it wasn't, you know, these things weren't as hazardous as I had originally thought. So that's what I'll say about that. Just looking at the chat here, I used 3rd degree burn and the effect was not like my friend's, which was more like a bead effect. That must be the name of a glaze. Kath Simmons, I'm just looking at your comments here in the chat. Oh, hi, I see you there.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, so this is what it looks like when I fired it. And it's not, let's see if you can see it better here. See how it's trying to do what my friend's has. It's more of a bead effect. And it has mag carb and it also has borax in there. Hers is absolutely perfect, just like the photo. And so I'm doing everything she's doing as far as temp, and this is a low fire. So I'm wondering, does mag carb ever go bad? It also has a borax in the glaze.
Okay, and you're looking for like a crawling effect?
Yes.
Yeah, so it could be that the layer of glaze isn't quite thick enough. It looks to me like it's kind of trying to crawl in the spots where it's thicker. So you might need a thicker application. Magnesium carbonate doesn't deteriorate that I'm aware of.
Right. Okay.
And I use it quite a bit because I do make these types of like lichen glazes and crawl glazes. And so I haven't noticed.
Well, what I did with my friend, I used FaceTime and I asked her, watch me apply it. And so she said, well, go a little thicker. And so I did, and she said, go the opposite way. And I did. It still did not work. So I just wanted to, you know, I'm going to still work with it. So as you can tell, it also has copper carb in there too.
Yeah. And it could have to do with how much water is in the glaze.
Yes. It's a real thick type glaze. You know, you put it on almost like a crater glaze. You know, it's just real like a yogurt.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not, I don't know how you can even get a specific gravity on that.
Right. Yeah. So interesting. I'm not familiar with this glaze specifically, but I know that these glazes in particular are really hard to work with, like really hard to kind of get them right. But yeah, it's interesting that it doesn't really seem to be crawling at all.
Right, right.
And yeah, so I'm not really sure why. If I could see the recipe, that would be helpful.
Right, okay. Well, it's on Glazy.
Okay.
As third-degree burn.
Third-degree burn.
And
okay.
It is, you could do a teal, a brownish with manganese. Anyway, the pictures on the Glazy are pretty evident. So I'll still work with it.
Yeah. I don't know why whenever I'm on here and I try to look something up on Glazy, I can't get the search to work. Burn, third-degree burn. Just seeing if I can find it.
It's maybe it isn't. It's Alana Wilson's glaze.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I could read off the recipe.
Let's see, Lana Wilson. No, I don't see it there either.
Okay.
But
maybe I saw it on Ceramic Arts, you know.
Yeah. Are you in my Facebook group? It's called.
I'm going to make sure I am.
Yeah, okay. Because if you want to talk about this further, I'd be happy, like if you want to join the group and then post the recipe with a photo, it would be easier for me to help you that way, just like, because then I can kind of look at the recipe and see like, the percentages.
All right. Thanks, Sue.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anytime. Okay, so I saw someone waving their hand earlier. Does someone on the video here have a question?
I still have a question, Sue. It's Andrea.
Oh, there's Andrea. Okay, perfect. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so you were talking earlier about the different cooling dynamics of a large kiln versus a small kiln. And I have a small kiln at home. It's a Conart 1822. And I have fired pieces at the pottery studio in the large kiln there. And they don't use cones or anything, but from what I understand, they program it to cone 6.
Right.
So I'm getting quite different results in the at home in the kiln, and it's just actually the glaze that seems to be affected the most is a commercial glaze that I use. It's an opulent sea spray. And so I've tried a bunch of things to have a slower cool down at home, and it just seems to make it worse. So I do have a couple of pieces here that I can show you the difference.
Okay.
If that would help.
Yeah, it would definitely help.
Okay. I'll have to start my video here.
Sure. Okay, I see you.
Okay, so I'll show you the one actually that is what it's supposed to look like.
Yeah.
So this is it's just a white satin white on the bottom, which turns out great regardless of where I fire it. But the glaze on top is this opulent sea spray, and this is what it looks like in the large kiln at the studio, and it comes out really nice. Regardless, it just seems like very consistent. No matter what happens with the kiln there, it's just a really nice glaze. So that. And then this is what happens when I fire it at my kiln at home, which is a smaller kiln. And I first thought it might be my thermocouples and it was firing too hot, and I actually changed my thermocouples, and it just doesn't seem to matter what I do. It still comes out kind of drippy and yellowy at the rim, and some people like this, but I don't.
Yeah. So, okay, so the glaze that you are using at home, are you making Or no, is that a commercial glaze, did you say?
Yeah, it's made by Opulence called Sea Spray.
Okay, so it can't be a making issue.
No, and I've actually brought the glaze because I had different, I buy it in powder form, and I brought glaze from home into the studio and fired it there, and it turned out beautifully. So, yeah. So it's just the different kiln cooling environments, or I've tried reducing temperature and then tried changing the cooling so that it's like doing a slower ramp down, and nothing really seems to make a difference.
Yeah, I'm wondering if the top, if the top temperature that it's reaching is different. And you said that they don't use cones at the studio?
Yeah, they don't use any cones, and it's supposed to be like they fired a cone 6, but.
Right, but you never know.
Exactly.
What I would do is I would make a cone pack and ask her to put it next to your piece in the kiln. Just provide your own if you really want that information, and just say put these two pieces next to each other in the kiln, because then you'll know, because it could be that their kiln is firing, like, to me it looks like yours is hotter, but I don't know that recipe. It just, like, I don't know, I just get the feeling that yours is fired hotter, and that maybe the community kiln is firing a bit cooler. But yeah, like, I think putting cones in next to your piece in both kilns, and comparing the different cones side by side, is probably going to give you your answer, because that, aside from the cooling, I mean, so your kiln would be smaller. Would it be smaller?
Yeah, much smaller. Yeah.
Yeah. So
the only problem is that they've closed this community studio down because of COVID. So I can't do that. So, but maybe I'll try firing the cone 5.5 or something, and in my kiln and at home, and see if that makes a difference.
Yeah. So you're using cones at home?
Yeah. And it looks like it's going to like cone 6.
Yeah. So cone 6 is like fully bent over, would you say? Would you say it's, is it like down or sideways?
Yeah,
or
it's like fully bent over.
Okay. Yeah. So that's generally how we fire to cone 6. Yeah. So once the studio opens, I would definitely do that experiment with putting cones just next to that one piece and see. But then I'd want to check the temperature before I played around with the cooling cycle. But you could play with the temperature, but I caution against firing to a lower temperature, because you don't want your clay to be vitrified. So as much as you don't like the glaze results, it's really important that your clay reaches its maturing temperature. So if you're under firing your clay, that I think is more problematic than having a glaze turn out not exactly how you want it. Because if your clay has any absorbency, so clay goes from being absorbent to vitrified, so when it's absorbent, it means that it can absorb water, and so when you wash your pots, they're absorbing water, which means it can also harbor bacteria and that sort of thing. And so it's really important. I think it's more important that your clay is fully vitrified than your glazes. So unless you want to just test on some pieces that you're not going to use necessarily, I just don't like the solution of firing to a lower temperature. Which clay body are you using?
It's usually a Plainsman M370, or else I use B-Mix, which is fine at cone 5, but the M370, I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, it might be okay at a slightly lower temperature. I know that the M370 is the first. So we at the studio, we're at Cedar Hill, where I work, we have the 340, the 370, and the 390, and the 300. And the M370 is the most likely to bloat. So I think that the M370 could come down. So to maybe like where the cone 6 is just starting to bend. I think it could handle a little bit of a lower temperature, and the B mix for sure. I think B mix is good to cone 5.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you want to do that experiment and you could use the B mix, that's what I would probably do.
Okay, sure. Thanks so much for your input. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. Matthews asks if you've tried cooling the kiln faster. Just for testing.
Well, the kiln at the studio takes like 24 hours to cool. And my kiln cools in about like 10 hours. So I think that the slower cooling is
good for it.
Well, that's what my thought has been.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I was curious about what you were saying about crystals earlier, and maybe there's crystals in this glaze that aren't having time to grow.
Right.
But I don't really know.
Yeah, I know. I know. It'll be great once we can open our studios again and everyone can get back to normal and do all the testing that they need to do.
Yeah, it's really hard not to be able to, you know, be in there with everybody, and
yeah,
it's like a social thing too. So yeah,
totally.
Looking forward to that day.
Yeah, hopefully soon. Okay, well, good luck with that.
Okay, thanks so much. Bye.
You're welcome. Lindsay, I see your hand is up. If you would like to.
Hi, this is my.
Hi.
I'm joining this call. I signed up for your class, so I watched a bunch of the modules yesterday and realized there's all sorts of data that I'm not gathering.
Okay.
This is. Let me see if I'm on my webcam, and I don't know if that's going to be enough light to see this. Can you see how spotty it showed up on this, or should I? Maybe I can shine a light on here. So this is. This is Amico Deep Fire Brick. It's a store-bought glaze that I was having, here, you can see me too. I was having really good luck with it. It was completely consistent. I used it at a studio that I used to share space with. And then I bought it and I was painting it on, and then I bought the 25-pound or the 25-gallon bucket of it, and it was working consistently for a while. And then I had my last like 2 kiln loads I ran, it did this, and I'm not sure what I did wrong. So I want to do some troubleshooting on it, whether it was that it got too thick, if maybe I didn't have cone packs in there. I do monitor how long the kiln runs for, and so the time it takes for me to run my load hasn't changed, so I don't think it overfired or underfired based on that, although I will start actually measuring that. Here, let me see if I can, there, you can see a little bit better how
okay. Yeah.
It just did this crazy, it used to be just, it would be thin or thick, but it had never pooled like this before. And it just on like all of the pieces. I had a whole bunch of this glaze in this load, and it like all of them just went to hell.
And is this a glaze that you're buying dry and adding water to?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so, and do you find that the application, like, does it feel thick in the bucket, or does it feel thin?
I think
like
thick. I think this was too thick.
Okay.
There were some other pieces in there. that didn't seem, it seemed like it went from too thin and iridescent to where it got a little bit too thick. It just ran like this. Like it wasn't a complete over application. Like it wasn't extremely too thick. It was like the minute it got just a little bit thick, it did this.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, I want to troubleshoot. I'm wondering if I should troubleshoot the kiln or the glaze or both, or like how to do this in a controlled method with
Yeah.
a home kiln that I'm not running. You know, I don't want to run. I run a couple tests in an empty kiln, I'm not going to get the same information. And so I just want to be really efficient about how I'm testing this so I can actually learn what I need to.
Totally. To me, it looks like an application issue, which like a thickness. So it looks like it could either be where the glaze is thin but drippy, where you're not getting an even application. Oh, but it also kind of looks like maybe it's crawling a little bit, which would happen where it's too thick. But we're going to get in the class, we're going to get into measuring specific gravity. And like, this is exactly the problem that my class is kind of designed to help you solve. Yeah. And so, yeah, so I feel pretty good about getting to the bottom of this.
Okay.
Because, yeah, so like my first question would be, what's the specific gravity? And based on that, so if the specific gravity is really high, then I would say that it's too thick and crawling. But usually when a glaze crawls, you can just see the bare clay underneath. But sometimes with these glazes that have a lot of colorant in them, it can kind of color the clay body as well.
Yeah, where it crawled, it left like a perfect thin application.
Yeah.
Spots, and then crawled to like too thick. Because I know what you mean. I've definitely had it crawl where there's like just bare clay underneath it.
Right.
And
yeah.
The worst is that I did 4 identical mugs like this, and they were not in the same spot because they were just nice little space fillers, and they all did the exact same thing.
Okay. And how long did the glaze take a long time to dry, or did it dry pretty fast?
I don't remember paying attention to that.
Okay, that's okay.
This isn't a glaze that takes a long time to dry though.
Right. And then my other question would be like, how long after glazing did you start the kiln?
Right away, but my setup I run it for quite a few hours at 180 degrees before it goes into actually firing.
Yeah. Okay.
I heat it for a while, but I typically glaze for many hours, load the kiln, and then go.
Yeah, and you've had good results that way.
Yeah, there's a few glazes that used to be consistent that stopped being consistent for me, which is why I signed up for the class, because it's hopeless.
Yeah, and did this issue just start happening when you bought that larger quantity of the glaze?
It was fine for a while, which is one of those glaze, like I have a few glazes that I know I have to be really particular with. I don't measure the specific gravity. I have little plastic bottles that I have BBs in, and I've got it marked the height, and I just float. And I have my own kind of scale of this is a 3.5 and this is a 4. So I watched a video many years ago, and it was just a simple solution. And so I know that like this glaze is good at what my 3.5 is. I could correspond it if I wanted to.
Yeah.
But like this wasn't a glaze that I was very particular about. It was pretty much the same, whatever consistency it was. There's a few that I know that I have to get perfect.
Yeah, right.
And all of a sudden, this one it was if I did 1 dip, it was too thin. If I did 2 dips, it did this.
Okay. Interesting.
Which is why I was starting to wonder if maybe my kiln you know, I had bad elements, or I just changed the thermocouple the other day because I was wondering maybe that was the issue.
Right. But like with the temperature, it does, like, to me, it looks like an application issue that I don't think temperature would really change the way that, like, that splotchiness.
Okay.
But yeah, I'd be curious to see your pots before they go into the kiln, like after you glaze them, just to see what the glaze looks like on, because that's another thing that I like to pay attention to, is just like how the glaze looks when it's dry before it goes into the kiln, because sometimes the answers are there. All these, yeah. But I think, yeah, I have a pretty good feeling that we can get to the bottom of that in the class. So, yeah, I think measuring specific gravity is gonna be like the first step, and then we can kind of see which direction to take from there.
Okay.
Yeah. So, to be continued, I guess.
Sounds good.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming to the chat, and thanks for signing up for the class and everything.
Yeah, you know, I'm in quarantine. I might as well learn more about glaze.
Right. Awesome. Okay, I'm just gonna look in the chat here, see what's happening. Deb Riley asks, can you talk about methods for making cone packs? Yes, I will do my best without a demonstration. But for making cone packs, I often just will take a coil of clay, you know, about that thick. So I'll roll out a really long coil of clay, you know, maybe an inch wide or so, you know, just wider than the thickness of a cone. And then I'll just, so I do 3 cone packs. If I'm firing to cone 6, I'll use a 5, a 6, and a 7. So I put the 5 in first. And then the 6 and the 7, and then I'll cut the coil, and then I'll just kind of, you know, 5, 6, 7, and cut the coil, and just make them that way. So it's just like you've got this kind of thick pad of clay that the cones are stuck into. Another tip is that you want to make sure that the cone is at the same angle as it would be if you're holding it just like on the flat table. So when you put a cone, I wish I had a cone on me, but I don't. But if you stick a cone on a flat surface, it's going to naturally sit. It's an 8-degree angle, but it's going to naturally kind of sit at an angle. So it's not like down like this. It's not straight up and down. It's just kind of over like that. And so when you put your cone on a flat surface, that's the angle that you want your cones to be in when you have them stuck in the clay. And that's going to give you the most accurate reading. And so that is a good tip. And then you always want to make sure that your lower cone is at the front of the line. So your 5 is going to melt first, and then your 6, and then your 7. Another tip is we usually like poke little holes in the cone pack with a pin tool, just because like a thick piece of clay like that can crack when it dries. So if you poke lots of little holes in it, that kind of helps the drying to be even. Another tip is to make sure your cone packs are completely dry before you start using them. So make your cone packs well in advance of your firing. I've made that mistake a couple times where I just got too excited. I got a new test kiln, and then I was like, I don't have any cone packs, and so I made cone packs and put a fan on them, and then I fired my kiln a little too early, and then the cone packs exploded. So you can learn from that mistake that I made. Deb, if you have any specific questions, or if you can let me know if this is helpful for making cone packs. And if anyone else has any questions about making cone packs, Joelle, I see your, nope. Here, let me just unmute you. I can't hear you. Oh, there we go.
Contact, in fact. It's about density again.
Oh, okay.
It's about density and superposition. Sorry for my bad English. But when superposing, things like that, for example.
Yeah, so like layering?
Yeah. Yes, I did it until now, just by eye, you know, by experience, looking at density. But since I found your videos on YouTube, I think it's a really good idea to measure that and reproduce more evenly.
Yes.
More consistent results, let's say. For me, they are consistent, but for my students, they are not always. And I cannot explain why, because just my experience tells me, yes, that mix is good. So my question is, I observe that you always speak about density around 147, 148.
Mm-hmm.
When you make superposition, do you still keep the same numbers?
Right. Okay. Yes, I see what you're saying. It really depends on the glazes. So at the studio where I work, it's a public studio, and so I manage the glazes for lots of people. And so these glazes, they get used by themselves. They get layered, sometimes many layers over top of each other. What I've found is that works best for the users of the studio, which are a lot of beginners, is to keep the glazes on the thinner side. So which means like a lower specific gravity. So I try to keep the specific gravity as low as I can without the glaze being too thin, you know, with the glaze still functioning well, so that the application will be thin enough for multiple layers of glaze. Because I find that beginners love layering glazes, lots of glazes, and so what I found was, before I started measuring specific gravity, and at the time that I started measuring, all of our glazes, the specific gravity was up around 1.6 to 1.7. And so just naturally, intuitively, when we were just adding water and just doing the finger dip test and not measuring anything, we were keeping the specific gravity much higher than I keep it now. And what we were finding was, like, a lot of the glazes were running, especially layering glazes. The glazes were crawling, but mainly the glazes were running because the glazes didn't have enough water in them. So then the application thickness was too thick, and especially with the layering, which leads to all the running. So once we started bringing the specific gravity down to, most of them are between 1.45 and 1.55, and it depends on the glaze. So some are a little bit less than that. Most are between 1.45 and 1.5. Then we try to get the glaze so that it looks good by itself. So just on a test tile, so it looks thick enough, but not too thick. And then we find that the layering is more successful. Just with having a little bit of extra water in. And so some of the glazes that, when we started adding extra water to them, they became very, very thin in the bucket, and we ended up having to flocculate them with Epsom salts to thicken them back up again. But so taking a glaze and then adding water to thin it down, and then flocculating to thicken it back up again, you still get a much thinner layer of glaze than you would get with a glaze with less water. So I find keeping the specific gravity on the lower side, kind of as low as possible, without the glaze just kind of disappearing, is what's working best for us. So does that Does that answer your question?
I'm going to try. And,
Yeah. Okay.
let's see.
Yeah, okay. But it's really individual. Like we test every glaze individually and we have a different number that we assign to each glaze. So it's like our white glaze works best at 1.5 and our turquoise glaze works best at 1.55 and our other glaze works best at 1.4. And so each glaze we've tested and we've kind of over time figured out what the best number is for them. So
thank you.
Lots of test tiles. You're welcome. I'm just looking at the comments. Visnya? Sorry, I'm so sorry. It says to ensure that the cones don't fall on top of one another, but that they fall beside each other. And for cone packs. So that's another good tip. So see if I can. So you can have your cones fall and then land on each other, or you can kind of angle them so that one falls here and then the other one kind of falls next to it. So that's another tip that we do as well, where we have our cone. I wish I had a cone pack I could show you, but yeah, so the cones don't face the same direction, but they're kind of angled out so that they're falling kind of next to each other instead of on top of one another. So hopefully that's as clear as I could make it. Okay, Richard, I saw you in here. I see a note. Can you talk a little about heat work? Yeah, so heat work, so while we're talking about cones, basically cones are made to measure heat work, which is a combination of temperature plus time. And so the way that I like to explain the difference between temperature and heat work is with cooking. So basically, you have your oven, so you're gonna cook a pizza. So you have your oven and you stick the pizza in the oven and you turn the oven up to 400 degrees. And so if you put the pizza in the oven and then the oven increases to 400 degrees, at the moment the oven gets to 400 degrees, is that pizza going to be cooked? If you have a different pizza, the oven is already at 400 degrees and you put the pizza in the oven, you leave it in for the same amount of time, the pizza that is in the oven at 400 degrees for a longer amount of time gets cooked more than the pizza that just reaches 400 degrees. And so this is where a lot of confusion comes in, because people will set their kiln to reach a certain temperature and they say like cone 6 is whatever, I'm not even sure what, cone 6 is like 2180 Fahrenheit or something like that. So if your kiln takes a short amount of time to reach this temperature, your pots are going to have less heat work done to them than a firing that takes a much longer time, even if it reaches the exact same temperature. And so, so the amount of time that your pots are in the kiln matters. It's not just the final temperature that they make it to. So you could fire your kiln to whatever the temperature is for cone 6, fire it really fast, shut it off, and your cone 6 might not even be bent yet. Or you could have a really long firing to the same temperature and your cone 6 might be completely melted into a puddle because of the heat work. And so it's just like cooking. And so if you're, the minute that your oven reaches 400 degrees, that doesn't mean that your pizza is cooked. It just means that your oven is at a specific temperature, but your pizza needs the heat work for the dough and the cheese and everything to melt, for it to become cooked. And so clay and glazes work the same way, where they require this amount of heat work for maturation temperature. And this is why on an Orton cone chart, so if you have the cone chart that tells you like cone 6 is this temperature and cone 5 is that temperature, you're going to have different columns based on the heat rate, the rate of climb at the end of the firing. So if the last, whatever it is, 200 degrees of your firing, if the last 200 degrees of your firing goes really fast, you're going to have to go to a higher temperature for the same amount of heat work than if your last 200 degrees is really slow. So say you're going up at a rate of like 50 degrees an hour, you're not going to need to go to as high of a temperature than if your kiln is going up at like 200 degrees an hour. So that's the difference between temperature and heat work. Temperature is just at one spot at one moment in time. That's what temperature is measuring. Oh, hi, Richard. Yeah.
Hi. So I recently did a slow glaze fire at cone 6, and I used the KM, the wonderful KM computer for my Scut 1027.
Yes.
And so it had a rate of well, basically I have here the rate. The rate, I don't know if you can see that, but yeah. So that was the rate of heat, right? And the reason I'm concerned is that previously when I used a glaze with a medium fire, it came out very nice. This one on the slow fire, the glaze ran, and I did a lot of shelf grinding. Right. So I'm wondering, you know, when you purchase a glaze and it says, you know, recommended cone 6, why don't they say recommended medium fire rate speed or whatever? Does that make sense?
Right, because there's different ways to get to cone 6. So if you are firing fast, you can still get to cone 6 by going to a higher temperature. But what they want is to look at those cones, and the answer to where your glazes and your clay need to be fired to is the cones should be bent over. Right. And so you can use your cones to kind of fine tune your kiln settings so that you can make sure that so like if I got a new kiln, or a new to me kiln, the first firing I do, I would make sure that I would program it for whatever cone 6 fast or slow or whatever I want to do. I would program it to fire, but I would monitor the kiln. I would put cones in the peeps so that I can see them during the firing. And then at the end of the firing, I'm watching those cones fall. And so if the kiln shuts off before the cones have melted, then I'm going to turn the kiln back on, and I'm going to record the temperature that was on like the digital readout that the kiln shut off. And then I'm going to raise that top temperature, and you can go into your kiln settings and you can do what's called a cone offset. So the kiln is programmed so that if you punch in cone 6, it's like it's got this firing schedule programmed in, just like what you showed me. So you can either program your own firing schedule, or you can just hit cone 6. And so based on how the cones look, then I'm going to go back into the kiln program, and I'm going to say, actually, I want the kiln to fire, 10 more degrees or 15 more degrees before it shuts off. So you can offset that top temperature. And like the kiln companies, they use a lot of data to figure out what these programs should be. But then, there's all sorts of factors that can kind of change the final outcome. And so the best way to control it and make sure that that your glazes aren't melting into a puddle is to have cones in the kiln, watch the cones fall. If you can't be there at the end of the firing, at least putting the cone packs in the kiln, looking at them at the end of the firing, and then you just you know, if you programmed a cone 6 firing and your cone 7 is completely melted, you're going to want to bring that down.
Yeah, so I put a 5, 6, and a 7 on every level.
Okay.
And so the 6 was just the tip was touching, you know, the shelf. So I got the feeling that, you know, that the temperature wasn't wildly too hot, but I don't know.
But then your glazes were running. So are these glazes that that are new to you, or the glazes that you've been using for a while?
I've had fairly good success with this one. So I had a Rutile and this is a copper, green copper kind of glaze. And I know that copper is got a lot of flux in it, right? So, so maybe it had to do with how much flux was in the, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it could be application thickness. Were you layering glazes, or was it just
but it
one?
could possibly. There were two vases that were this about, you know, 14 inches high, pretty big stuff. And at the bottom, I probably was fairly thick. So, you know, maybe that's it. I'll keep going. I don't want to bore everyone with this, but so basically, you suggest observing, you know, at the time, real time observation, right?
Yeah, at least once.
Okay.
Yeah, just to make sure.
Yeah. So, do you wear glasses when you look in those holes? I mean, I'm having a hard time seeing my cones.
Yeah, I have those green colored glasses that block the.
And you can see the cone better with that.
Yeah, I also will blow into the kiln, and when you blow on the cones, they kind of get brighter. You got to make sure you only have one peep open if you do that, because if you have two peeps open, the air goes in and then it comes back out, which I have done that before.
Not a good move. Okay.
No. For your eyebrows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, but even if you can't monitor your kiln, like just having the cones and looking at them after, and like as you said, if the cones didn't look completely overfired, then I would go to an application thickness that like that could possibly.
I prefer to do that actually. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, good. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay. So we have 15 more minutes, so I have time for another question or two. I'm just, if anyone wants to talk, I'm just going through the chat here. Let's see. Kevin Hutchinson had said, cone packs are made in advance to allow clay to dry. Yes. Matthew uses self-supporting cones. Yeah, so that's another option, is you don't have to make cone packs if you buy self-supporting cones. So they just have a wider base so that they can just sit by themselves and you don't have to stick them in the clay or anything. So they're just a little more expensive. They didn't have self-supporting cones, I don't think, when I started in ceramics. So I've always just made cone packs, but yeah, the self-supporting cones are super handy, and it's another step that you don't have to do in advance. You can just throw them in at any time. Carol says, can you speak a bit about adjusting a cone 8 glaze to cone 6? That would take a lot longer to explain than we have time for. So adjusting a glaze's melting temperature has a lot to do with understanding the chemistry and the unity molecular formula. So there's different ways that you can adjust a glaze's melting temperature. So there's the silica and alumina. So silica is our main glass former. Silica melts at a really high temperature, and so we use fluxes to bring that temperature down to a temperature that our kilns can reach. And so the ways that we can lower the temperature of a glaze recipe is we can either reduce the silica and alumina, so reduce the things that melt at a higher temperature, or we can increase the fluxes, the things that bring that melting temperature down. But without having a recipe to kind of work with, it would take a lot of testing and a bunch of tweaking of the chemistry, but that's basically what you need to do to lower the temperature of a glaze. Is you need to either increase the proportion of fluxes to glass formers or decrease the amount of glass formers. So either way, you've got your fluxes go up, your glass formers go down. So as the fluxes go up, the temperature comes down. And if your fluxes go down, your glass formers go up, the temperature goes up. So that's kind of, those are the variables that come into play. There's also boron, which is a low temperature glass former. So another way that you can decrease the melting temperature of a glaze is to increase the boron, which is going to lower the melting temperature of the glaze. So with the time that I have, that's my best kind of description of how you can kind of play with the melting temperature of a glaze. Let's see, just reading the chemistry. Jacqueline asks if I'll be teaching a basic chemistry course. Yes, I do have a basic chemistry course that I teach, that I've been teaching in Victoria, where I live. And so now that my Mastering Glaze Consistency course is all finished and running, then I'm gonna start working on turning that workshop into an online course. So that'll be in the works this summer. So hopefully, yeah. I start work again next week. I have a job as a studio technician. So I do have to work 3 days a week. And so then all of this online course building stuff kind of happens on the side. And so I often don't have as much time as I would like to make courses and do this sort of thing, but I do as much as I can. So that's like my next plans for online courses and workshops is I'm going to do a glaze mixing, like how to mix glazes for the beginner. So people who've never mixed glazes before, I want to teach a workshop on that. And then I also want to do like the basics of glaze chemistry with understanding the unity molecular formula and the stall chart, and using glazy.org, and yeah, how to increase and decrease a glaze's melting temperature, how to fix crazing. All of those sorts of topics are part of this chemistry course that I'm going to be creating. Well, it's kind of already created. I just need to like put it in a format that I can deliver it online. So, so that, I think I'm caught up with the chat. We still have 10 minutes. So does anyone in here have anything that they want to say or ask a question? Matthew? Yeah.
Hey. So I'm still working with that satin glaze that I'm trying to tweak to work well with my clay body.
Yep.
And I did some test firing of that last formula, I think, that I showed you.
Yep.
And it came out maybe a little bit more semi-gloss than I would like, but I'm not too concerned with that. I'm more concerned with it. There was a lot of blistering or like, unresolved surface defect.
Okay.
And I don't know if I need to work on formulating the glaze more or if it's just a kiln issue, because I'm firing with a kiln sitter and I can't do like a drop and soak kind of firing, or, I didn't know if you had any insight on, maybe how I fire my kiln sitter that might better.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, there isn't a super scientific way of doing it. like what I've done in the past, and these are just things that I'm like having trouble with a glaze, and so I'm going to just try. So when the sitter shuts off, then I'm turning the kiln back on to medium, so that it's slowing the cooling. So I can't really tell the temperature that it's holding at. I'm just kind of hoping that that's enough. But it's really hard when you don't have like I have a digital pyrometer that I use with my kiln sitter. Do you have like a thermocouple?
No.
So that could be something like that you could, I just stick it, I took a soft brick peep and I just drilled a hole through the center. So I stick the thermocouple through one of my peeps to the kiln, and then it's just attached to a little digital pyrometer.
Right.
So I have a temperature reading. It's not super accurate at the high temperatures. Like I find that as soon as it gets to about 1,000 degrees Celsius or 2,000 Fahrenheit, it just doesn't really work anymore. So, but I still record the temperature and record. And so if I was to try to mimic like a hold at the top, I would just be monitoring that to make sure the temperature wasn't falling too much, or make sure the temperature isn't going back up. But so are you getting blistering? Is that what you're, or is it just like a rough surface?
No, I don't know. Maybe not blistering, but just like when the bubbles melt out of the glaze, they're not healing over on, certain spots. On this last firing, and it got me thinking. The previous glaze I made, I was getting micro bubbles, and so now I'm thinking maybe it's melting out better, but still not good enough, and so that the bubbles that are melting out aren't healing over.
I see. Yeah, that's what I would probably that's what I would maybe think, because you had those micro bubbles. So now if it's melting a bit more, those bubbles are making their way to the surface and popping. So maybe increasing the boron. So did we took your glaze and we were trying to get rid of the crazing, so we increased the secondary flux?
I was trying to fix the micro bubble issue.
Oh, okay.
But you also had mentioned that you thought the alumina content was too high for cone 6.
Right.
So I took the ratio. I kept the same ratio, but lowered the alumina silica content. Yeah. And then I also changed the flux ratios to like 2.5 to 0.75 instead of 3 to 7.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So when you decrease the primary flux and increase the secondary flux, you're also going to raise the melting temperature.
Okay.
And so we brought the silica and alumina down, so that would lower the melting temperature, but so we might still need to bring that silica and alumina down a little bit more, or increase the boron. I forget what the boron was at.
Well, it's like 0.19 or 0.2.
Okay. So that sounds good. Yeah, so I would maybe bring the alumina and silica down a little bit more.
Okay.
And like if you really want to test, I would like maybe bring it down quite a bit.
Just to see. Yeah.
Just to see what happens when you get the glaze running, or maybe almost running.
Mm-hmm.
And then you could, once you bring it down, it's really easy to add just a little bit of silica and alumina to that same test batch to bring it back up incrementally. So you could have it down here and then bring it up a little bit and a little bit, just to kind of see until it dries out. So then you kind of have this range of, okay, it's running down here, it's under fired up here, and what the surface is, like what the range of surfaces you're getting in between are.
Yeah, makes sense.
That's what I would do.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, let me know what happens.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm curious.
Thanks.
Okay, we We have 4 minutes left. One last question. Tolga says, for glaze consistency, you calculate and record specific gravity. Do you also calculate viscosity? You say flocculation is an important factor, but it only changes viscosity and not specific gravity. Yeah, so I don't know if you were here earlier when we were talking about the viscosity cup, or the Ford cup, or the Zahn cup as they're called. But that's a way that you can calculate the viscosity of a glaze. So it's a cup with a hole in the bottom where you dip the cup, and then you measure the amount of time that it takes for the glaze to flow out the hole in the bottom of a cup. So if you wanted to measure viscosity, then that is a way that you can do that. And changing the viscosity by flocculating should not change the specific gravity. So the first thing that you want to set is the specific gravity, which only has to do with the proportion of solid particles to water in a glaze. And so once you have that set, then changing the viscosity, you're not adjusting any water, so your specific gravity value shouldn't change at all. It's just the way the particles are interacting with each other. It's the attraction of the particles to each other that changes the viscosity of a glaze. And so that's kind of how viscosity and flocculation are different from specific gravity. And so I always measure specific gravity first to get to, to get to a consistent number. And then I judge the viscosity. I don't use one of those cups to measure the number of seconds. I wanted to ask if you keep a record of viscosity. Yeah, so what I am looking at is the way the glaze moves in the bucket. And I found this, I used to do the finger dip test, where you stick your finger in the glaze and you see how the glaze coats your finger when it comes out. So this is what I used to do, but as I've done this more and more and more, what I'm finding is that I can get really close by watching when I'm stirring a glaze in the bucket. And when I stop stirring, how long it takes for that glaze to stop moving after I stop stirring. So if I'm stirring a glaze in the bucket and then I stop stirring, if it keeps circling around and around and around and around, that's what I would consider low viscosity, and that's when I would flocculate a glaze. If when you stop stirring, the glaze just stops moving, so it doesn't swirl around at all, that's what I would consider high viscosity, and I would want to deflocculate that glaze, assuming I've already set the specific gravity. When I stop stirring, the glaze moves around once or twice and then kind of abruptly comes to a stop, that's what I consider perfect. And so that's what I bring all of our glazes to in the studio where I work, is I get the specific gravity to the number that we've determined through testing that we want it to be, and then I judge the viscosity by the way the glaze moves in the bucket. And if it's low viscosity, then I will flocculate. And then if it's high viscosity, then I will deflocculate. And if it's just right, then I just leave it alone and I don't do anything. Do you play with specific gravity and or viscosity for painting and dipping glazes? So we just use one specific gravity for all glaze application methods because it's a studio where there's lots of people who use lots of application methods. So we just have one set, and then it's up to the users to kind of make that work for them. But if this was for me, and I was the only one using the glazes, then I would play around with the specific gravity, and I would determine the specific gravity that I like best for that glaze based on my application methods. So all my testing, if I was brushing glazes, I would be brushing my test tiles, brushing the glaze on my test tiles. I would use the same application method that I use on my pots for my test tiles so that I can determine what I want the specific gravity to be. And so I generally will take a glaze mix it up so that it's on the thick side with minimal water, and I'll test it, and then I'll add a little bit of water, measure specific gravity, test it again, add a little bit of water, and that's how I decide what I want the specific gravity to be. So thank you very much. You're welcome very much. So I hope that's helpful. Yeah, and that's it. It's 11 o'clock in the morning here in Victoria, BC. So that is going to be the end of our Glaze Chat. So I just want to thank all of you so much for joining me and for doing these Glaze Chats with me. I've had a lot of fun. If any of you are interested, my online course is open for registration until Sunday. It's called Mastering Glaze Consistency, and it's all about specific gravity and viscosity, flocculation, all of these topics. Let's see if I can put a link in the chat quickly in case you're interested, but I know you're all on my email list, so you should have probably received multiple emails from me by now about it. But so there's the link in the chat. That's just for the course info page. So if you are interested and want to take the class, yeah, registration's just open till Sunday, and then Module 2 comes out on Monday, and then you get a new module every 3 days up until Module 7. And then we do a weekly Glaze Chat like this on Fridays as well. So yeah, and I know a bunch of you have already signed up, and some of you are in the class from before. So thank you, everyone. And I've really enjoyed these Glaze Chats. So I hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend. And yeah, good luck out there. I'm hoping that the world will resume some sense of normalcy sometime soon. But yeah, we just kind of have to take it as it comes, right? And do our best. So thank you so much, and have a good day. And we'll see you on the internet and on Facebook and everything like that. So have a good one. Bye.